Hi everyone, looks like we got your notes that the webinar was having an audio problem. Sorry about that. You have to love technology. So we are going to go ahead and we are going to reboot. Welcome to the webinar. I think the slides will make a lot more sense as we now have audio. So thank you for your patience there. Today we're going to talk about ACC's approach to assessing student achievement. For some of you, this webinar might be the first time you've had a chance to explore ACCSE's approach to reviewing and assessing student achievement, while for others, this webinar will hopefully serve as refresher training. We'll start with some big picture topics like the Student Achievement Standard and guidelines for employment classification. And as the webinar progresses, we will dig deeper on a granular level as we do a line-by-line analysis of the graduation and employment chart. So really quickly, let me pop in and say hello to everybody. Hi everybody, hello from Arlington, Virginia. I'm Chris Lambert, I'm the Associate Executive Director. You now have video and audio, which is always an important part of any successful webinar. Thanks for joining us today, we really appreciate it. And I'm going to take the time to pop in from throughout the webinar to field some questions as we go on. But as we go, before we go too far forward, let me go ahead and turn things over to our Executive Director, Mike McComas, for some brief remarks, and I'll go ahead and pop back in here in just a little bit. So thanks for your patience. Sorry about the rough start. Hopefully things will get a little bit smoother from here, so I appreciate it. Mike, why don't you go ahead and, again, welcome everybody to the webinar.
Yes, thanks, Chris. And I'll reiterate Chris's welcome to everyone for joining us for this particular topic in this webinar. It's one that we feel is a great opportunity to continue to provide for whether individuals have been with institutions for a long time and just need some refresher training, or individuals are just newly coming on board and looking for ways to make sure that this information is reported to the Commission accurately and thoroughly. And you know, I think that the approach here is to kind of start at 30,000 feet and funnel it down to really ground level. And so Chris is going to walk you through that kind of progression. And my intent of really kind of coming on board just to open up the webinar is to, again, say thank you for your diligence in trying to understand how ACCSE puts this information together. And without being too repetitive, because I know that Chris is going to go into this information as well, but really kind of reiterate the importance of the manner in which ACCSE historically has and continues to use program level outcomes as a tool in assessing institutional and program success. And I want to emphasize that it is a tool, it is not the tool, it's not the end-all be-all metric that's used, but it is an important metric, and it's one that the Commission relies upon when it makes accreditation decisions. It's one that students rely upon when they make enrollment decisions. And so it's abundantly important that the information that is provided to all the different constituents that rely upon this information be accurate. And so ACCSE has a particular methodology. In fact, we've been using this methodology for over 20 years. We've been collecting student achievement data since about 1990, began using it in metric form since 1993, and established our student achievement standard in 1998. And so institutions that are accredited with ACCSE know and understand well how the Commission uses programmatic outcomes in its review paradigm, and the importance that ACCSE places on that. And so the chart itself that Chris is going to walk you through is simply the mechanism. The mechanism for institutions for themselves and for, again, other entities like ACCSE to begin to gauge, to begin to benchmark, to begin to understand how well a program is doing. And to help that institution either find ways to or really look at the laudatory aspects of really successful programs, or to look at less successful programs with an eye towards improvement, and using those outcomes as a first step in the analysis paradigm. That is to say that as Chris walks you through this, nobody at ACCSC considers that the completion of the graduation and employment chart is the ending point of an institution's search, but instead is the beginning point. It's simply a set of numbers that tell you something. They certainly don't tell you, the school, a student, or the commission everything that needs to be known about that program. And that's why I say it's but a single tool that is used in the assessment. And so the benchmarking that is done is something that, again, serves as a gauge. But Chris is going to make some very good points about benchmarking and about where you should be setting your goals relative to those benchmarks. And I don't want to steal his thunder too much, because I know it's some really important information and graphics and metrics that he's going to share with you on that. But suffice to say that understanding how those benchmarks are derived and what they actually mean when you look at the grand scheme of things should be, you should try to be very mindful of, because it can be very helpful to you as you're setting your goals. So please take the information that Chris gives you along those particular lines to heart, and the relative success that a program demonstrates vis-a-vis the actual grades that they report. And then lastly, I'll just say that the Commission also relies very heavily on the accuracy of the reporting, the ability to have a high level of confidence and reliance upon the information that's submitted. And that's why we're going to walk you through line by line, so that you understand this particular methodology has very limited opportunities to remove students or graduates from the calculations. And that's purposeful. It's not meant to try and excuse the vast majority of students. It's actually meant to try to capture the vast majority of students. It's not meant to try to capture every single factor, issue that may arise out of a student's enrollment. It's meant to capture what we think are big ticket and common items, but not every single issue that a student might present in going and attending a particular program at any given institution. So when Chris talks about the categories and talks about the exclusions, be very aware that those and those alone are the exclusions that the Commission allows for. So even though you may or may not agree with the limitations that those exclusions present, that notwithstanding, those are the categories and the reasons why individuals may be removed from the calculation, and the Commission doesn't take into account any others. And then Chris will also talk a little bit about the importance of reliability in terms of verification. So that process, to some degree, will be touched on here as well. So we hope that and believe that this is a very informative and fulsome webinar with regard to the array of information that's going to be provided. And I know that Chris is going to be able to, like I say, start at 30,000 feet and dial it in, but we hope that you were able to take away everything that you need to be successful in reporting on your graduates, because what it really means is that it's your opportunity to report on your success. It's your opportunity to gauge, know, and understand your successes, and know where improvements potentially may need to be made. Identify those areas. Look for the factors that impinge upon success. find ways to overcome those factors, or in some instances make the decisions that you need to make relative to change or discontinuation of programs that are poor performing. All in all of those things work in the institution's favor, and they work in the favor of students and graduates and hopefully future employees. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Chris and say again, thank you for your participation and for your diligence, and we hope that this gets you all the information that you need to be successful.
Thanks so much, Mike. I think that I have emotionally recovered from our shaky start, both in terms of audio and video, and I want to send my thanks to the 513 people who told me they couldn't hear. So hopefully you can hear now loud and clear, and it'll give us a chance to dive into the webinar today. And I, again, appreciate Mike taking the time to join us for a few minutes. And I want to start with some foundational thoughts with respect to successful student achievement. And in order to maintain ACCSC accreditation, institutions must demonstrate successful achievement by maintaining acceptable rates of student graduation, licensure certification pass rates, and graduate employment rates in the career field for which each program is offered. What we know is that meaningful things are happening every single day at ACCSC accredited institutions. And I can say that with confidence because, quite frankly, we conduct hundreds of on-site evaluations every year. We survey thousands of students. We observe classroom and lab activities. We interview faculty and staff. And we also regularly review reported rates of graduation and employment via the annual report and progress reporting process, which we've had in place for accredited institutions, as Mike indicated, for some time. And these results are showing with confidence that every day students are graduating. Every day students are going on externships. Every day graduates are passing licensure exams and are gaining entry or advancement in the field for which training is provided. And we think that is meaningful, and we think that is significant. Demonstration of successful student achievement is crucial. It's crucial not only because it is an accreditation standard, but because schools have an obligation to provide a meaningful educational experience, one that leads to employment for the student population served. This is more than just a benchmark. This is about providing the highest possible educational experience that will set students up for success in their chosen career. And I know it is a commitment that our institutions take with incredible seriousness that it deserves. The enterprise of accreditation is evolving and improving. The most significant development in accreditation in the past decade can be seen with the implementation of the independent verification of placement requirement. And we're going to spend some time talking about that today. But many institutions have also shared with us that this process feels a bit more granular, a bit more in the weeds, and a bit more intense in terms of its focus. And I can't disagree with those positions. I know that we work very hard at the Commission to be reasonable and fair and to consider all the factors faced by an institution and the students that they serve. But more importantly, we think this is an opportunity to change the dialogue from skepticism to confidence. And there is tremendous amount of interest in understanding this sector, and there is a tremendous amount of scrutiny and a tremendous amount of skepticism, and we must be able to withstand that white-hot intensity and stand behind our successes as an industry. And we believe that the independent verification of placement is a process that will help change this dialogue to one of confidence, one that shows that students are graduating, that they're passing licensure examinations, and they are getting jobs. And that's how we approach this. We don't necessarily approach this from a sense of we don't believe these rates. We doubt these rates. We approach this from a position of we have confidence in this, quite frankly, because we've required verifiable records of initial employment since as early as 1998, and this independent verification is just another way to test that. So let's spend a couple of minutes talking about the Student Achievement Standard. ACCSC first promulgated the Student Achievement Standard at the program level in 1998, and over the past 18 years has really refined its approach to assessing successful student achievement. As part of its ongoing commitment to assessing student achievement at its accredited institutions, the Commission recently conducted an 11-year longitudinal study of graduation employment rates from 2005 to 2015 as reported in the annual report. And in doing so, the Commission's hope to discern the stability, predictability, and reliability of the rates using and establishing the benchmark rates. The Commission was particularly interested in whether there were significant over-year variations in the data reported, and the longitudinal study applied the same formula to the 11-year data set that is applied historically to a 3-year data set that has been used to establish these benchmark rates. Overall, the Commission finds the data collected and the resulting benchmarking established to be both stable and reliable. And these rates are, in fact, semi-permanent at this point, and you should have received the July 1st, 2016 ACCSC annual report, which talked about the establishment of a new benchmark rates for both the graduation and on the employment side. So while the Commission will continue to study and assess the reported rates of student achievement regularly, the Commission does not intend to adjust the rates unless the data suggests an adjustment is warranted. Long-winded way of me saying that historically we've done a 3-year study of graduation employment rates, and after completing this 11-year longitudinal study, these rates are now, air quotes, semi-permanent with respect to both the graduation and the employment rates required for ACCSC accredited institutions. Here are our graduation benchmark rates, and as you can see, the ACCSC standard takes program length into account, given that the analysis of these data continue to show significant relationship exists between program length and student program completion, which is a way of saying, if you look at the chart, the longer the program, the data is showing that a greater chance there is for a student to be unsuccessful. And so you should be looking at your program performance in terms of graduation rates based upon the established benchmark graduation rate. What I like to say to institutions is, if you look at this chart, if you are at benchmark, you are in compliance. But I don't think minimum compliance should be your ultimate goal, right? Because if you are just in minimum compliance, if you're just at 84% for a 3-month program, or you're just at 47% for a 6-month program, 16-month program, yes, you're in compliance, but if you look at the chart, you're also below average. And what I want to underscore is that I just don't see a lot of mission statements that say we're going to be the best below average, minimally compliant institution you've ever seen. I don't think that is the best goal for an institution to have. So you should at least be striving for average, if for anything, to be an above average institution. And if you look at how the data plots out, again, this is an evaluation of graduation rates distributed for all programs. You can see that that natural bell curve there, which really underscores that relationship between program length and program completion, and also kind of underscores the fact that we believe that our benchmarking formula is statistically sound and stable and reliable in terms of measuring student success and student performance. When we look at the employment rate, we can see that the Commission recently adjusted its benchmark employment rate from 68% to 70%. And again, I think I would underscore this approach for schools as well, which is if you're at 70%, you're absolutely in compliance with the standard. And again, you're 8 percentage points below average, which I just don't think where you want to be as an institution. But this employment benchmark rate is applicable to all programs regardless of program length. And another way to underscore this is if we look at the data, we can see what I was trying to illustrate with respect to being in compliance with the benchmark and then still being below average, and that the school should certainly strive to be an above average institution. But more importantly, if you are below benchmark, you are in the bottom in terms of program performance across 700 accredited institutions and upwards of 9,392 programs. And that really, I think, more than just the chart, shows how the Commission is looking at this in terms of how other programs are performing on the graduate employment side. And so striving for 100% employment, I think, is our ultimate goal at every institution, right? We want the 100, 100, 100 of graduation, certification pass, and employment. That is our worthy goal, but certainly trying to strive to be an above average institution at the end of the day. And with respect to the licensure and certification requirements, for those programs where a government entity requires the attainment of a passing score and a certification exam in order to work, the Commission determines that pass rate to be acceptable when it's at least 70% or higher. Keep in mind, if another entity, licensing board, requires a higher rate, the higher standard shall apply for the institution. If we look at the total number of team findings over 66 team summary reports, and these were on-site evaluation reports that were considered by the Accrediting Commission at the May 2016 meeting, we can see that, one, there were slightly more than 4 team findings per visit, but 2, at the Commission level, the most significant concern expressed by the Commission is regarding student achievement, and most of this was on the employment side with a benchmark employment rate that is below, at this time, 68%, which is now, of July 1st, 70%. And if I go ahead and jump back in another 3 months, you can continue to see that student achievement remains an area of concern for the Commission, particularly with respect to the employment side. There certainly are other compliance issues, but quite frankly, if I think where I were to share this chart for you going back the last 3 or 4 years, every single chart would show the focus on student achievement. So it's something that is certainly ingrained into the fabric of ACCSC accreditation. We spend a lot of time talking about student success, and we think rightfully so. And in fact, you know, no matter what I say today, what message I try to deliver, my hope is that what you hear is how does this impact students? How is this going to benefit students? How is this going to help students to get a job? We try to be student-centered in everything that we do here and make sure that schools are providing every avenue, every resource, every opportunity to support and enhance student success. Really quickly, to talk about program viability and assessment, I think it's important to say that given these explicit expectations regarding student achievement, the Accrediting Commission really expects schools to conduct a realistic assessment of the viability of their program offerings and the factors impacting student success. One thing we know for sure is that one of the significant strengths of ACCSC schools is that in their market-driven approach and ability to make changes to programs and their ability to develop new programs quickly. So schools that have been ACCSC accredited have really, I think, adopted an approach to be as responsive as possible to the market. We see a lot of program activity, but what really gets my attention is that non-sub modification line, because what it says to me is that institutions are tweaking, institutions are making necessary changes to existing programs as they go along and as they learn more about how their students are performing. And so I think that's important and a necessary activity for a school to engage in. The philosophy being that if a school does not change, regardless of what it's teaching, it will ultimately fall behind and could ultimately fail. So, you know, I think this really shows the commitment that institutions have to making sure that they have reliable programs. But you should be looking at program performance, not in a single snapshot, but in terms of trend analysis as well. The Commission is intensely interested in learning on not only what the rates are, but what were they and where are they going? Are things getting better or are things getting worse? Are there any other mitigating factors? Again, we talk about those non-sub modifications. What changes has the school made with respect to the program curriculum, or how have you enhanced your career service initiatives? And if you're ACCSC accredited, you know that we can't get through a conversation without talking about program advisory committees. We believe in them. We put a lot of value in them. We emphasize them. And my advice to you is that if you start to see a downturn in program performance, or if you're starting to see that your rates are falling below benchmark, you should be taking the time to have a program advisory committee meeting, because I can almost guarantee you that my commission is going to ask you that very question. You've gone from 72% employment to 54% employment. What is going on? What is changing? Why are you falling below expectation? What can the employers tell you? So keep in mind that as you continue to assess your program offerings by looking at the data. What does retention data, graduation data, employment data, licensure pass rate data, employer satisfaction data, student satisfaction data, what can you glean from all of that? How are you performing as an institution as measured by program performance, graduation, employment, and licensure pass rates? I think the data will be very telling in terms of the story behind what's going on at the institution. The best piece of advice I have regarding program liability is to take direct action when you have a program that is not meeting expectations. I don't think that you want to, in this environment, put the fate of a program or jeopardize a school's ability to earn or maintain accreditation by continuing to enroll students into a program that is performing consistently below benchmark. The commission is ultimately going to ask, why does the school continue to enroll students into a program that is performing so poorly? And in my estimation and in my experience in working with the Accrediting Commission, the school is not going to be successful in this process if the data reveals that students are not graduating, are not passing a licensure exam, and are not earning a job in the field at a rate that at least meets the established benchmark. And so I also am keenly aware that there are a number of institutions that are seeking or thinking about transitioning to ACCSC accreditation from another recognized institutional accrediting body. And that really has served as the impetus for us to talk about student achievement. But understand this, I don't believe the schools that are thinking about transitioning have the luxury of time. And if a program comes through the accreditation process that's below benchmark, at a minimum, I think you could expect the commission to defer action on that application. And given the potential for a time crunch, that is not a luxury you have. And so in some cases, an institution is going to be faced with a very difficult but necessary decision about whether to maintain a program, perhaps a program they've had for years and years and years, that today is not meeting the established benchmark set forth by the Accrediting Commission. So you need to take action. Something that I can't underscore enough. So thanks for hearing me out on that. This feels like a good place to stop and take some questions. So let me go and head here and pop back in. Hi, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us so far. Hopefully now that you can hear, things are going a little bit better. So it looks like I have a couple of questions, and I'm not going to be able to answer all the questions that we have, but please know that we'll circle back with you offline if we're unable to answer some of your specific questions. So let's go ahead and dive in here and see what we have from the folks. A lot of folks are telling me that they can actually hear me, so that's exciting. Okay. Let's see. What is the intuitive reason why the graduation rate benchmark drops with increased program length? You know, from my sense, I guess from my experience, it's more time, right? It's more time in class, it's more time in school, it's more time for things to happen. And so I feel that the good news is that schools really offer focused programs that have the necessary elements that are going to help them to be successful. And we don't see a lot or any course stretching. I do think if we're being realistic and we're having this conversation, that historically schools have been driven by Title IV access in terms of a program length motivator. A lot of 900 clock hour programs, and the question becomes, is 900 clock hours necessary to gain the skills needed for entrance into the field, or is 900 clock hours a driving factor for access to student loans? So it's really about results. It's really about student success and student results in that regard. So hopefully, Karen, that answers your question. Sure. Is it possible to reinforce the importance of detailed advisory board minutes? They must document detailed discussions, suggestions, and follow-up. And the quote is, "People don't believe it." Thank you, Tom. Absolutely. We have a webinar and program advisory committees, and what I can tell for you is if you're going to go through all of the motions of putting a committee together, having a meeting, having agendas, scheduling it, having them show up, make sure you take the time to ensure that your minutes reflect the detailed conversation that took place. Too often, these minutes are weak, they're overly general, they're overly broad, and they don't convey to the commission the necessary information to instill the confidence with the accrediting commission that, yes, employers are talking about this, and yes, the school is taking action on these matters. So thank you for your thoughts, Tom. I agree with you, and I appreciate you passing that along. Okay. There's a couple really particular programs, questions that I'll field with folks offline. There's some questions about related field positions. I promise to answer that in just a minute. How does the commission view the current employment status nationwide with respect to creating a benchmark for the accredited schools? Do they gauge based on the current market for that specific field? Do they take consideration of the job market nationally? Well, the data, the benchmark from a quantitative perspective is 70%. Within the standards, an institution is afforded an opportunity to demonstrate why, for example, 64% employment is satisfactory given economic conditions, given unemployment rates, given the market served, and that's directly in the standards. It is not the commission's responsibility to figure that out, though, as I believe it's the school's burden to demonstrate that we have all of these factors that we are facing in our local market. One of the markets that I'll bring up is, we have, I think, over 40 accredited institutions in Puerto Rico, and we certainly recognize the tremendous challenge faced in Puerto Rico right now in terms of the economy, but that still does not give a school a pass on demonstrating successful student achievement, and the school really must explain to the commission the impact of the conditions on their ability to show that success. So absolutely, I think it's taken into account, but these benchmarks, as Mike said, they're not hard lines in the sand, but they certainly are a guide point for the commission in making their decisions. Over the past few years, the employment benchmark has changed several percentage points. What accounts for these changes in the rate? The increase, and Stephen, thank you for that, the increase from 68% to 70% is largely due because of institutions being better, institutions performing better, institutions showing higher rates of student success. And so historically, it's been on a 3-year analysis, and so in the middle of the recession, I think you saw the placement rate go as low as 66%. And over time, schools have performed better, and as I referenced at the beginning of the webinar, over an 11-year study, 70% falls right into the wheelhouse with respect to establishing that benchmark. So hopefully that gives you some color on how the commission establishes that benchmark, but really, in a nutshell, it's based upon ACCSC accredited institution performance. And the good news is that schools are performing better on the employment side over the last few years. Okay. I tell you what, I'm going to drop off the questions for now, and I'm going to come back in. Real quick, when did the placement rate increase from 68 to 70%? Meg, that was July 1st. And if you go to the alerts page at www.accsc.org, you'll see that accreditation alert. Lisa mentions that there is a grace period in the alert. That is right. The commission did establish a grace period given the change in benchmark. Lisa, I tend to talk about the benchmarks and not kind of the exceptions to that. But if you read the alert, you'll learn more about the established grace periods, and in particular how it impacts a couple of programs that are longer in length. Thanks for that, Lisa. I saw retention mentioned several times. Is there a specific benchmark for retention, or is retention encompassed in the graduation rate requirement? And that's from George. We have a retention chart online. We use that for more contemporaneous information to go in front of the commission, but we do not have a retention benchmark. We have a graduation benchmark. Sometimes when a program is brand new and the commission wants to learn more about how it's performing, they will ask the school to fill out their retention chart. So hopefully that answers your question, George. Does your foundational data include graduation employment data from institutions that have now been found to inflate their experience? Would this inflate your benchmarks? Charles, I'm not sure I quite understand. I think that the independent verification has really instilled some confidence, so maybe when I get into that a little bit more, we'll talk about that. So that's a lot of questions to start. Let me jump back off because I don't want to lose too much time. I know we have a lot of material to cover here. So I'm going to jump off. I'll see you guys in a little bit. And let's go back and talk a little bit more broad strokes. Okay, so the guidelines for employment classification, this is something that came up in quite a bit of the questions. And this will give me a chance to kind of flesh that out a little bit. Schools must be able to justify the classification of each graduate as employed in a training-related field and must maintain verifiable records using the following guidelines. The school really should have established policies and protocols in place with respect to these guidelines that talk about things like reasonable time period, sustainability, and relatedness. And so taking a look at the guidelines themselves, and if you look in the webinar tool, you'll see there's a series of handouts in that toolbar, and you can actually download the guidelines directly from the toolbar. But according to the guidelines, the employment classification is appropriate and reasonable based upon the educational objectives of the program. The employment is for a reasonable period of time, is based on program objectives, and can be considered sustainable. It is not a single day of employment. The employment is directly related to the program from which the individual graduated, aligns with a majority of the educational and training objectives of the program, and is a paid position. The employment classification is verified by the school or verified as a third party, such as the commission, as follows. With respect to regular employment, the school secures written documentation from the employer verifying the school and the employment is related to the student's program of study. The school secures written documentation from the graduate, this is an or written documentation from the graduate verifying the employment or employment is related to their program of study, or showing diligent efforts have been made to secure such written documentation. Without success, the school is able to maintain employment verification that has a verbal from the graduate and a verbal from the employer. Regular employment, it's sustainable, it's ongoing, there's documentation exists, it's specifically related to the training provided by the institution, it is a paid position. Check out the guideline definitions for regular employment. Under self-employment, the school secures written documentation from the self-employed graduate verifying the employment is valid, including at a minimum a statement signed by the graduate which includes their name and contact information, an attestation that self-employment is aligned with the individual's employment goals, is vocational, and is based upon the education and training received, an attestation that the graduate is earning training-related income, and in cases where licensure is required, an attestation is that such licensure has been achieved. And so self-employment is a particular note in certain fields like massage therapy. And so if you do have a self-employed graduate, keep in mind there are a series of expectations with respect to the attestations that must be provided. And if you do not have everything that is required as identified in the guideline, the commission will question that employment. So make sure you take the time to review the guideline in that regard. If we talk about career advancement, this is for students that are already employed at the time of graduation, and they can be considered employed when they complete the program of study. The school should have written documentation from the employer or graduate that shows that the training allowed the graduate to maintain their position due to the training provided, or written documentation from the employer or graduate that shows that they are eligible or qualified for advancement based upon the training. So if we look at records and the student was employed in the field before they started the program, and you're qualifying this student as career advancement, keep in mind there are some benchmarks in place with respect to documentation there. Okay, that is a quick focus, a quick hit on the guidelines for employment classifications. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Let's see what kind of questions we have on employment classifications and the guidelines for employment. Let's see. For an attestation, do we have an ACCSE form to use? We don't have a specific form, but what I would do is take those definitions of what the commission is looking for and put them on that form at a minimum, in addition to the other information that you want to learn from the graduate. How do you document verbal verification from a graduate? Well, Lance, I would call you and say, hey, Lance, I got a report here that you're working ABC Industries as a welder. Can you confirm that? And you say, that's right, Chris. I'm working as a welder. I started January 1st. I'm making $35 an hour. I'm working 40 hours a week, et cetera, et cetera. And so that would be the verbal verification of the graduate. John asked, if someone is getting paid under the table, would that still be considered as legitimate employment under ACCSE's guidelines? No. Most of your students are getting federal financial aid, and the expectation is that this investment in their education will result in them getting a job and paying taxes. So it will count against you, and that is something to pay particular attention to. But thanks for the question, John. I think it's an important one. Are we required to track employment of F1 students who elect to return back to their country after graduation? Albert, great question. I promise you I'm going to answer that when we get into the graduation and employment chart, and we talk about other unavailable, which is something I think the ACCSE schools know quite well. Can you expound on Mekon? Boy, everyone's got lots of questions here. With a verbal confirmation of employment, do we need a signature from the graduate or employee? No, I mean, that would be a written document. So you are verbally verifying it, and you as the career services person is signing off on that. Please clarify career advancement before they enroll, as you stated, or if they get a job in their senior year or while enrolled. Well, you know, the question becomes if Cyrus, if a lot of students are getting a job before they graduate, then why do they need the entire program? So if you have a 900 clock hour program and a lot of students are getting a job at 600 clock hours, I think the commission might start to question program length, but I don't think necessarily that's career advancement. Hopefully that answers. If someone works for an employment agency and works at multiple assignments, is that considered sustainable? You know, that's something the school is going to have to determine through their evaluation. What is sustainable employment? Is it ongoing? We certainly have a lot of freelancers, part-timers, full-timers. There's a lot of diversity there. But it can't just be a single day of employment at a weekend health fair. It has to be ongoing. So quite a few questions here about documentation. I'm going to take that as a hint and keep moving forward, because I think that we're going to answer a lot of the questions that were being asked here. So see you in a few minutes. I'm going to jump back in and go over some more data, and we'll come back here and see what other questions I can answer for everybody. But thanks for your questions, and thanks for your patience as we go through the material. Okay, let's talk a little bit about independent verification. Keep in mind, I'm not going to dive deep on this topic today. We have a webinar on this very topic online. I would encourage you to listen to it if you're unfamiliar with the employment verification process. There's a lot of information about best practices and lessons learned, and the FAQ as well. This webinar and the slides will be online as well. But I just want to touch on independent verification because I know it's important, but I'm not going to dive too deep into that process. So from the 30,000-foot level, the Commission, has had a long-standing requirement for institutions to maintain verifiable records of initial employment, and we've continually assessed institutional compliance through this requirement in a variety of ways, including on-site evaluations and random sampling of annual reports. The independent verification went into effect for all schools in the accreditation process in 2014. And the purpose of this requirement is to assess the school's compliance with accrediting standards and whether the school has verifiable records of initial employment, as well as to ensure that the institution's records can be relied upon in making decisions about a school's compliance with student achievement standards and benchmarks. The Commission places a high level of reliance on the accuracy of information and data provided by schools in the accreditation process and truly believes that this independent third-party audit will facilitate self-evaluation, improvements in operational procedures, and assist schools in meeting the burden of demonstrating ongoing compliance. And as I said at the outset, we think this is really helping to change the dialogue to one of confidence. So, really quickly, ACCSE will conduct its own random sampling of reported rates of employment through the annual report process. And so 10% of the schools will get a congratulations letter from ACCSE once a year that says you've been selected for random sampling. In this case, ACCSE does the verification. The school simply provides the G&E chart and the supporting documentation. And if you are going through the renewal of accreditation process, you are pulled out of the random sampling the year before and year after. But I wanted you to be aware, as an ACCSE accredited institution, you are subject to a random sampling. And it is truly random, as institutions have told me that they've been selected every year for the past couple of years. And that's how random it really is. But for this purpose, once every renewal cycle, as part of the initial cycle, which could be anywhere from a 1 to 6 year grant of accreditation, a school must subject 50% of the data reported in the graduation employment charts for all programs to employment verification, right? So the independent party will be verifying employment records from the employer or the graduate, whether those were verbal or in writing. The independent third party does that in a matter independent from the institution and must conduct the verifications without assistance from the school. And the school will be providing a full report of the independent verification in their SER, which is provided to the on-site evaluation team. So not a lot of specifics there. Again, there's a webinar. Again, if you go online to accsc.org, under the resources section, there's an entire page dedicated to independent verification, as well as an FAQ that'll answer a lot of questions. This is how the chart looks with respect to the annual report year, the name of the third party, the total number of students sampled, the total number available, the sample size, again, hoping that's 50% or higher, and then the 4 categories, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. One of the things to pay attention to as an accredited institution is that we have taken the work number and fleshed that out a little bit because we don't want a third party verifying another third party's work. And so those students are categorized as unable to verify, but we're allowing you to flesh that out to show us of the total number of students that were unable to be verified because they were work number, how many graduates are captured there. We think that is a more accurate depiction of student success. So the employment verification categories, and the school will be reporting on the total number of students and percentages in each category. Verified as correct, verified as different, unable to verify, and verified as not correct. And again, if there is a third party verification process like work number, those students would be categorized as unable to verify, and then you'll flesh out those work number graduates in a separate part of the chart. So let's talk about verified as correct. It's the same employer as listed in the school's record. The start date is within 45 days of the verified start date. So one of the things that the commission learned over the last 2 years, that a record wasn't necessarily incorrect or invalid because the start date was off by a few days. And so they've established a threshold of 45 days. And so as long as the record can be verified and the start date is within 45 days as recorded, then it is a verified as correct. And there are 3 categories that we talk about: the exact match, the obvious match, and the confirmed match. And so let's say we have an automotive technology program, and a completed enrollment record for a graduate from this program indicates that they're working as a mechanic. And so the third party has that record, is going to contact the employer and seek to verify, is it accurate? And the exact match is the record says mechanic, the third party verifies mechanic, exact match. An obvious match is that the record says mechanic, but the employer verified the title as auto mechanic. That's a bit of a nuance, but certainly related. And then sometimes in certain fields it gets very technical, where the record says mechanic, but the verification says that they are a technician. And through the conversations with the employer or graduate, it is determined that it's substantially similar to being a mechanic. The job responsibilities are descriptive to say they work on cars, they do tire rotations, oil changes, change batteries, and general car maintenance, exhaust work, etc. That would be a confirmed match. And as long as it fits within one of those 3 boxes, that is a verified as correct. Verified but different is that, 1, the start date is more than 45 days from the record as verified, that the title is substantively different and not an obvious match or confirmed match, right? So they are working, it is in the field, but the record is incomplete or incorrect in a number of different areas, including the start date of employment, the job title that is not obvious or confirmed in terms of the commission's definitions. Unable to verify simply means that the independent third party wasn't able to verify the record from either the employer or the graduate. And again, we talk about the impact of work number. The third party doesn't have to contact graduates who are fall under that private work number service, and you'll provide that information separate in the chart. And what we're seeking to avoid is the verified is not correct. It is a different employer. The position was unpaid or an internship. The graduate denies working in that position. The graduate record was not found in the employer's records. It is an incorrect record, and that's really what we're trying to avoid there. Let me share with you some of the data results. We've had about 226 schools go through this process in the last 2 years. They have used 28 different third parties. ACCSC has information on a party that we use for our random sample. That might be a good starting point. But as long as the company meets the criteria for independence, that's on the website, on the FAQ, and there are 7 tests that the independent third party must meet. As long as they meet that definition, a school has the flexibility to choose an independent third party that works best for them. And ACCSC schools have used 28 different independent third parties, almost 17,000 records. 95% of the schools met the required 50% sample. This says to me that the instructions in the SER are very clear. 17% of the schools went ahead and did a 100% sample of employment records. So you have to do a minimum of a 50% sample of each program, and 17% of my schools have done an 100% sample. Based upon the 17,000 records, we're seeing a 70% verified as correct. 21% were not verified, and I think that number drastically is smaller when we take into account the impact of the work number. 8% of the records were verified but different, and 3% were found to be not correct. And if I look at it by cohort, the cohort being the workshop, you can see in January 2014, this was the first group out of the box, didn't do as well in terms of performance compared to the rest of the cohort starts. And then for some reason, and we really couldn't determine why, in September 2014, you can see that that cohort of schools also struggled with respect to the requirement to do independent verification. But, you know, when I look at 16,933 records, and I see that only 383 were found to be incorrect or unable to verify as an incorrect record, this gets back to the question that was asked about my confidence in CCSE accredited institutions. Yes, I'm pretty confident based upon this data that students are graduating, passing licensure exams, and getting jobs. And this is just one more way that the Commission can test that. And what has the Commission done with all of this information? Well, of the 507 records that they went through, let me flesh this out a second, they took 184 actions, most of the time asking for additional information. 20% of the time they said we need some more information. Of that 20%, 34% of those schools, their information was accepted. But you can see the Commission has taken action to include formal verification reporting, deferring action based upon a high level of records that were unable to verify or verified as incorrect. Schools have been placed on warning and probation. I can tell you that in all of these examples, independent verification was not the only compliance finding, but one of several compliance findings. But the Commission is continuing to use this information as a tool to determine institutional and program performance. So that was really fast, not too deep, because again, there's a really, I think, a detailed webinar that will really walk you through that I encourage you to take a look at. So quickly, let me go into a couple questions, and from here, things are going to get really, really granular. I'm going to go into the graduation and employment chart line by line. I'm going to walk through a student start in a particular program and show you how we track this through ACCSE's formula. So a couple of questions before we do that. All right. Hi, everybody. So a couple questions we got here from the membership. What can be done with graduates that leave the country? How can we help them get a job when we can't send them to an employer? Kenneth, great question, and I promise you I'm going to get to that in just a couple of minutes. Does it matter how long after graduation a verification is completed? Good question, Lance. Well, you want to make sure it's sustainable, right? So if you do it one day after graduation, you're going to have a hard time determining it's a sustainable employment because they've been working one day. But I wouldn't wait 6 months, and I wouldn't wait 3 months. I would wait 14, 21, 30 days. What we have learned and what schools have told us is that the sooner you do the verification after an initial kind of sustainability period, the better luck you're going to have, the better results you're going to have. If you start trying to verify records that are 6 to 8 months old, you're going to have a challenge with respect to verifying that information. Can you define the work number terminology? So the work number is a third-party company. You have to pay to get a placement verified, and many major employers are using the work number. So a school says, I want to verify Chris Lambert's employment, and the employer says, we use work number. So you got to contact them, you got to pay them to get the employment verification. It's a service. And so what we're saying is that we don't want the third party that you're using to verify another third party's work. And so those students are unable to verify, but the reason is they're work number students. So hopefully that answers your question. How is placement counted for students graduating with multiple AAS degrees? HR, accounting, general business. Graduate has a job in accounting. How is that treated for other degrees? Well, I guess, we're vocational in nature as an accrediting commission, and the student is coming to you to learn a particular skill to get a particular job. And so I think a general approach to it, the more liberal arts approach, becomes challenging. I guess the reason, the focus is why did they go to school? To be an HR professional or to be an accountant? And so I think you need to do some sussing out there with respect to the specifics. We experienced that trainees to go on with externships and stay with that employer after externships. The employer will show the start of externship as a hire, which will be outside of the 45 days. How do we work with that? Thanks for the question, Chuck. I think this is a record nuance that we're going to have to understand. I mean, at some point, the data is what the data is, and so just be able to demonstrate to the on-site evaluation team with supporting documentation that the records show that they were at our school, they got an internship, and the majority of these students were hired by the internship location and currently still work there. And that's why you're seeing the nuance between the start date and the confirmed and verified start date. So hopefully, Chuck, that helps you as well. Can the school use work number documentation for employment verification for third-party verification? I mean, I think that you could. I think it'd be pretty expensive, but that's certainly something that you could consider. Okay, some questions about student illnesses and disabled. I promise that we'll talk about that. As far as the work number, is it not able to verify status counted against the school? Not in that case, as long as you have the record that shows that they're unable to verify, and the reason is that we have a third-party verification on hand. We have a number of students who work for large hospitals that only use work number. We could then have a program with 50% unverifiable. How will that look? Well, the good news is, Jennifer, that the chart now fleshes out on the bottom the number of those unable to verify who are work numbers. So first glance, I'd be like, wow, that's a lot of students that I'm able to verify. Oh, wait, most of them are work numbers, so I'm much more confident in the information provided by the school. So I think the commission understands that. Hopefully that helps, Jennifer. What is considered a drop? Lee, I promise that we'll get to that. Has the commission considered evaluating groups of related programs based on zip codes and developing G&E rates based upon specific program categories? 9,000 different programs. I don't think the commission is ever going to establish benchmarks for welding and benchmarks for cosmetology. We think this is a fair approach that gives schools some flexibility. But thanks for the question, Mandy. Appreciate that. It's not really something that's on the commission's agenda. Questions about the graduation employment data? I will get to that. Here's an interesting question. As a school starting the initial accreditation process from ACICS, obviously the benchmarks differs. Will there be a grace period coming from ACICS to meet the guidelines from ACCSC since there is such a short period of time to move over from a different accreditor? No. Our expectations are what they are, and we have the same expectations for ACCSC accreditation institutions that we have for anyone seeking to come to ACCSC. So I certainly understand it's a different approach. This is the commission's approach. This really gets back to my remarks at the beginning, which is if your program is coming over to us in the ACCSC formula, you're below benchmark, then I think you're going to be faced with some challenging decisions about which programs to transition over. The commission is not going to accredit an institutions whose programs fall significantly below the graduation employment benchmarks, period. And they're not going to do it. They're not going to set different expectations for schools. These guidelines, these benchmarks are the expectations, and they are explicit. And I think the commission is reasonable, and I think that they have established some grace periods for schools. But again, for a school seeking to transition, you want to get off on the right foot. This is not a time to be talking about waivers. This is not a time to be talking about expectations. you want to come into this accrediting commission as cleanly as you can. And so that's the best guidance I can offer, and we're certainly here as a resource to help schools to talk about that, to walk through that, to talk about program viability. But to come in and start talking about grace periods and waivers out of the gates, I don't think is a sound approach. Okay. Let's go ahead and jump into the graduation and employment chart. We're going to go deep, deep, deep into the weeds, and I'll see you back here in just a little bit. So, the graduation and employment chart. This is ACCSC's mechanism for determining a school's graduation and employment rate. So, how are we going to determine the report period, and how are we going to complete the graduation and employment chart? That's going to be our focus. So keep in mind a couple key things. The graduation and employment chart is required for all programs offered at the institution, and you will have a separate chart for a program that is offered on a full-time and part-time schedule because of the impact of satisfactory academic progress. And so for this example, let's talk about, I have a welding program. One is a full-time program that is 8 months in length. One is a part-time program that is 12 months in length. And so if we assume that July 2016, which is the report date of the current month, and we plug that into our chart, you can see that it results in different reporting periods. But let me give you a more practical look at that. And so for the webinar test, you can see if I have an 8-month program, right, my report period as defined is April 2014 to March 2015. But I also have a 12-month program, and as I enter 12 onto my chart, you're going to see that it has an impact on the report period. So for this example, again, we're going to use the 8-month program. It's 8 months in length. You times it by 1.5 times because that is what is afforded to a school for satisfactory academic progress. And then the commission affords 3 months for placement. So for an 8-month program using a July 2016 report date, we times it by 1.5 times and we add 3 months. That gives us 15 months, and that's going to give us the end, the start of our reporting period, and then we go back an additional 1 year or 12 months to get the beginning of the report period. For my 12 months times 1.5 plus 3, that gives me 21 months. And you can see I'm going to capture a different window. The good news is the chart does this calculation for you. And so when you fill in your report date and you fill in your program length in months, you will see the beginning and ending of your report period. And you are going to now track students by start date in a particular program through this defined reporting period, right? If you look at the chart that's online, it's also in the webinar tool here under the information that's available for handouts. You can see that there's tabs, right? So you can read the instructions, you can read the glossary, and there's a lot of automatic calculations here that I will explain. But we try to be as transparent as we can be with respect to the categories. So we're going to be tracking students by start date by program. There are 12 columns on the chart, so if you have rolling admissions, lump them together by month. So every program, full-time, part-time, by start date, by program. So practical example. This will, I think, help to crystallize how we're going to do this. I have an 8-month certificate welding program. And in the defined report period, I had 22 starts. I'm a small school. I have 5 different programs. Welding is just one of my program offerings. In my defined report period, I had 22 starts. And I'm going to track these 22 starts through the program. But before I get to that, let me step up on the soapbox really quickly and reinforce that it is critical for schools to have consistent application of their policies and procedures. And during the on-site evaluation process, when we're looking at these 22 starts in that report period, we're looking for admissions documentation, documentation of refunds, transcripts for students, applicability of student services and advising forms, documentation of satisfactory academic progress, documentation of signed and dated enrollment agreements for every single student. So every single student that is captured on this chart went through an admissions process, has a high school diploma or GED, has a signed enrollment agreement, has copies of grades of attendance, has copies of advising. Every single student. That will set you up for success, and that is probably the biggest challenge that you have, which is you have good policies, you have good procedures. Are they being followed every day in a consistent fashion? Does documentation exist? The three biggest success keys to this process are documentation, and I'll give you a guess on the third one. It's documentation. So make sure that you're aware of that, that this is going to be a very student-by-student assessment of your policies and procedures. Back to our example, I had 2 starts during my report period. I had a start of 10 students in April 2014 and 12 students in October 2014. Those are the 22 students that started in my welding program. So let's track the 10 that started in April 2014. There they are. There are my 10 students. They got enrollment agreements. They have copies of high school diplomas and GEDs. They are the 10 students. What happened to them? They started together. What happened? That's what this chart is going to define for us. It certainly is not going to capture everything that happens. And so at some point, a drop is a drop is a drop. And we'll talk about that. 10 students. I go to my chart. Number of students started, 10. April 2014. At that time, I also, as I shared with you, have a part-time welding program. It's 12 months in length. And one of my students is having a very difficult time striking a work-life balance and has made the decision to transfer into the full-time program. They want to get this over with and get out into the field. They got bills, they got challenges. It's too drawn out, it's too much. All the things that happen with students. You have student services, you work with them, you try to find them a pathway. This student made the decision to transfer to another program within my campus, not another school within my system. This is within the 4 walls of my institution. Right? Data-wise, if they transfer to a school within my system, we're going to count them as a drop in terms of this particular campus, but you still have the opportunity to explain to the commission that that student was ultimately successful, providing them a copy of a transcript and a record of employment from a sister campus. But from a data perspective on the chart, this is from a program at my campus. And so we go to line 3, transfers to another program, and that gives us a 1. Transferred out of the welding program into the part-time program, trying to strive that work-life balance. Transfers to another program at my institution. That's student number 5. They are now out of my cohort. I am down to 9 students in the cohort because 1 transferred out. At the same time, and I might have got this backwards before, I had a student in the 12-month program who's a go-getter. It's a little slow for her. She wants to go to the full-time program. She's going to transfer in to the full-time program from the part-time program. So line 4 is a transfer in. Line 3, transfer out. Line 4, transfer in. Within my institution, I'm back up to 10 total starts. 10 starts out, 1 in. I have 10 starts. This shaded box is automatically calculated in the chart for you. Line 6, and this was a question that was brought up, is a category which removes from the graduation rate calculations students who fall into one of the following 4 classifications. If the student died, if the student was incarcerated, if the student was deployed in terms of active military service, or if the student has a medical condition that prevents continued enrollment, they will be pulled out of the calculation. You must have documentation if you categorize a student as other unavailable. So a copy of military orders. Incarceration is public information. All due decorum and with respect to a public death notice. And then a note from a doctor that says a student cannot continue because of a medical condition. We don't necessarily care what the condition is, but it must be signed off by a medical professional to say they can no longer continue their education. In this case, student number 9, I'm in Colorado Springs, I'm in San Diego, I'm in Virginia Beach, I'm in Pensacola, wherever I am with a heavy military population. Student number 9 was deployed. And we have a record that shows that they are active military service. And so we are going to pull that student out of the calculation. This does not count against the institution. If you look at the chart, you can see I've pulled that student out. The total number has gone from 10 to 9, but my graduation rate remains the same at 100%. Students available for graduation. Again, we had 10 starts, right? Student number 5 transferred to another program at my school. Student number 11 transferred in. Student number 9 was active military service. That leaves us with 100% graduation rate so far and 9 total students. There's my chart. You can see it. The 1 out, the 1 in, the 1 active military. I have 9 starts. I have 100% graduation rate so far. I had 2 students in this cohort. Student number 3 withdrew. Student number 10 was terminated because they violated satisfactory academic progress policies. Look what that does to my graduation rate. 7 of 9 students successfully graduated. I have a 78% graduation rate for this start period. Now keep in mind I had 2 starts during this report period. I'm going to have to repeat this exercise for my 12 students who started in October 2014. But so far I have a 78% graduation rate reported for my April 2014 start. Right? So I would expect to see 7 transcripts that show that they satisfied the academic requirements for graduation. And the chart also automatically populates to tell me that there are 7 students available for employment, and then under that yellow box it shows me to make sure I capture all 7 of those students who are available for employment. So a little bit of self-check formula there. That is a snapshot of graduation. 10 starts, 1 out, 1 in. We get 10 total starts. 1 unavailable. That gives us 9 starts, not counting against the school. 2 dropped out. That gives me 7 of 9, or a 78% graduation rate. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone so far. So before we jump into the employment side, let me go see if anybody has any questions about graduation on the graduation and employment chart. Let's see what's going on. All right. We do not have cohorts. It is more common than not for each student in our program to be at different stages in the program. We have no more than 5 students at a time. In this case, should each student be reported on his or her own G&E chart? No, I think it's important that you lump them together by month, right? There are 12 columns on the G&E chart. You should lump any rolling admissions by month. Hopefully that helps, Cara. Okay, here's my favorite questions. You can make your own determination on how sincere I am on that. But what happens when a student drops out and re-enrolls? And the answer is it depends. Okay, if a student drops out and re-enrolls within 150%, they're a start and a grad or a drop one time, right? So what I mean is that if I start and I drop and I re-enroll within 150% and I graduate, count me as a start and a graduate. If I start and I drop and I re-enroll outside of 150%, I'm a start I'm a drop, and then I'm a start on another cohort. And if I drop again, I can count against you twice. So it's about the 150% rule, right? But if you are kicking a student out for satisfactory academic progress purposes and re-enrolling them a week later, what did you do to determine that they are now able to meet your academic requirements? So there's some spider webbing that happens there. But as a general rule, if a drop is a drop is a drop, unless they drop and re-enroll within 150%. So hopefully that answers your question. Is graduation rate calculated on a programmatic basis or institutional? It's everything that ACCSC does is programmatic in nature in terms of student achievement. The commission will consider institutional aggregate rates, but we look at individual program performance. Graduation rates, employment rates at the program level. So keep that in mind. Lisa asks, who counted as dropped out in that cohort? Well, there were 2 students who dropped out or were a drop. A student who withdrew and a student who was terminated. And so if I actually show you that so you can see it, where are my 2 students? There they are. Student number 3 withdrew. Student number 10 was terminated. Those are the 2 of the 9 students who impacted my graduation rate. So hopefully that answered your question there. If we only have one program, switching between programs be considered switching to or from another program. If you only have one program, a drop is a drop is a drop. You can't be switching in and out because you only have one program unless you're doing it on a full-time or part-time basis. So, Kayla, maybe you and I can talk offline on that. Okay. Sorry that I'm staring blankly here at everybody. Trying to weed through some of these questions. How do you calculate the 150%? The chart does it for you. So you fill in your report period, you fill in the length of months of your program, and the chart will identify 150% plus 3 months for employment. So that's the good news. The chart will do all of the calculation for you, right? But typically it just times it by 1.5. So if I have a 12-month program, you add 6 months because that's the 1.5, and an additional 3 months for placement. So hopefully, Grace, that helps you with your question. The question is, am I accountable for the entire start or just those who complete for placement? David, you're accountable for the entire start, both on the graduation and employment side. So far, we've only tracked graduation. We're going to now track what happens after graduation, but absolutely accountable for every single student who starts in your program. The distinction between a transfer to and transfer from. Well, a transfer to is you're currently enrolled in this full-time program and you're transferring to the part-time program. So you're transferring to another program. Transferring from is I'm in the part-time program and I'm transferring to this program within the same institution. So not another school. So from a full-time to a part-time or vice versa is how we're going to calculate that. And again, under the 3-month rule, that is the commission's definition. It's program length times 1.5 plus 3 months for placement. That is the commission's definition. Okay, let's go ahead and jump back into the chart. I want to talk about the employment side, and I'll come back in and do my best to answer a couple questions in a little bit. Thanks. Okay. We've now successfully tracked students to graduation. Line 11 is graduates further education, and those are the number of graduates that continue on with education at an accredited institution on at least a half-time basis. In this case, my Wunder kid who transferred from the part-time to the full-time program because it was too slow for her, well, no surprise, she's going on to pursue a degree. I have an acceptance letter. She's furthering her education. It's an accredited school. She's going at least a half-time basis. Very similar to my graduation unavailable, I have an unavailable for employment. That's death, incarceration, active military service, the medical condition. And this gets to the question that was asked before, which is an international student who has returned to their country of origin. So if you have an international students who left the United States and went back to their country, you can pull them out of the graduation employment calculations. Keep in mind, though, if 80% of your graduates are unavailable for employment because they're international, is going to raise the question whether you are vocational or not. If your students are returning to their country of origin, but they're employed in the field for which training is provided, then count them as employed as long as you have a verifiable record of initial employment. So this unavailable for employment is not going to capture everything, but if they died, if they're in jail, if there's active military service, if they have that medical condition with a note, or the international student, they're withdrawn from the calculation. In this case, student 6, again, I'm in Virginia Beach, I'm in San Diego, I'm in Colorado Springs, I have a lot of military. She was actively deployed, and so she is being pulled out of the calculation. And I have documentation to show that, and you can see the impact. I had one graduate further education, one graduate unavailable for employment. I have documentation for both that shows me now that of my 7 graduates, 5 are available for employment. Those 2 students are not counting against my reported employment rate, and I have documentation available. 4 of the 5 graduates from the April 2014 start got a job in the field for which training was provided. I have a verifiable record of initial employment. I subjected it to independent verification. It came back as verified as correct because I had the job title and descriptive job responsibilities that clearly show it's a paid position related to the field of welding. And in this case, it resulted in having at least an 80% employment rate for this cohort. And the chart is telling me that I still haven't captured everyone. Remember, I had 5 available for employment, and I've now captured 4 of the 5 at 80%. Right? That's how the chart does that. So there's an error, right? I feel like I'm finished, but the chart's telling me there's someone missing, and I know I followed the instructions, and I know my records are organized, and I know this isn't my fault, and I wish the chart would tell me who is missing. It does. It's telling you that someone is missing from the placement side, and in this case, one of my graduates decided he didn't want to be a welder. His passion has always been dolphin training, and he is employed in an unrelated occupation. Right? And I capture that on the chart, and you can now see under the yellow box, I have now captured everything. The chart also gives me a chance to revisit those students who withdrew or terminated to determine if they actually are working in the field. Some fields that don't require certification or licensure, a student is able to get a job based upon the training they received, but perhaps they didn't graduate it. This provides some contemporaneous information for the commission. In this case, we know that welding requires certification, so neither one of my students who withdrew or were terminated from the school are working in the field. And this tells me that I captured all of that. I entered 0 into that chart. My employment rate is 80%. Right? So for this cohort, I have tracked students who started together in April 2014 through graduation and beyond. It resulted in a 78% graduation rate and an 80% employment rate. I know that I have to do this again because I have 12 additional students. I've captured 10, right? And I went through this exercise in October 2014, and I didn't have quite as much success, but at the end of the day, it shows that overall, based upon this report period for my 8-month welding program, I have a 76% graduation rate and a 79% employment rate, which far exceed not only the benchmark, but also exceed the average. And I really want to underscore why this is important. You know, this is not just about numbers on a chart. You know, this is about people's lives. And we looked at almost 7,000 students last year. pursued an education in welding. And if we look at all of the welding programs that are offered by ACCSE accredited institutions, the graduation rate was 70%. And I look at my rate, and I'm at 76%. The employment rate for all welding programs based upon the 2015 annual report was 75%. And I look at my rate, and I'm at 79%. So I am outpacing the average as reported by the ACCSE accredited institutions. But really what this means when we talk about confidence, it means that there were 4,859 welders who successfully completed the program and were eligible to work in the field, and 3,656 newly trained welders entered the field last year from ACCSE accredited institutions. Skepticism to confidence, 3,656 working welders earning an income in the field for which training is provided. Now, I don't know how things are in your city, but our bridges are falling apart in Washington, D.C. And we just have recently read if they don't do something about the Roosevelt Bridge, they're going to have to shut it down. Well, I sure hope there are some qualified welders available to work on Washington's infrastructure because we desperately need it. And I hope when I'm driving over that bridge that welder was well trained and certified to know what they were doing. Just like I hope that truck driver had a comprehensive truck driving program. Just like if I take my dog to the vet, that I hope this vet tech is well trained and prepared to work with my very old, very crabby dog. Right? So this is important stuff. This is real people. This is real lives. These are real jobs. And so that's why we take this so seriously. So let me go ahead and see what kind of questions we have about the graduation and employment chart. But that's what we've just done. We've just walked through the G&E chart. We've walked through the starts for my welding program, the 22 starts of my welding program based upon the categories defined by the Accrediting Commission. Let's see what kind of questions we got from everybody. What is the best documentation to give for those individuals that enlist in the military after graduation? Do they have to be considered active duty? The standard says if they were actively deployed, but a copy of their military orders is what we're looking for. So Liz, make sure you get a copy of those military orders. Does ACCSE publish the graduation rates by program for accredited institutions? That's something we're actually developing right now that will be available here in the short term, which is as part of our transparency initiatives, we're going to do our very best to provide this information into the hands of students. We also understand that for many institutions, there are gainful employment disclosure requirements where you are required to disclose your graduation and employment rates to students. But we're going to have a clearinghouse on our website for ACCSE accredited institutions. For a medical waiver, is it sufficient to obtain an attestation from the graduate without a medical note? It is not. You know, all due respect to your graduate, we want to hear from a medical professional that this individual has a medical condition that prevents them from working. Again, we don't really care what it is, but as long as it's from a medical professional that says this student cannot work because of a condition. What kind of documentation needed for a student who we know is self-employed, however, they are not willing to provide any confirmation to the school? Well, what did you do and what documentation can you provide? And at some point, if you can't, you might have to take the hit to say that we couldn't get any information. It's unknown what they're doing. And that's going to impact your rate, but hopefully not push you below the benchmark. The hope is that it's not the majority of students that are having this problem. I think some individual students are going to certainly come up from time to time. Would statement from workers' comp payments work for notification? Again, that's not a note from a medical professional, and that does not indicate they're unable to work, so we need to be specific there. What documentation is acceptable for international students? Well, were they enrolled on a visa basis, and what was the expiration of their visa that necessitated them to return to their country of origin? How do I handle a student who returns to their country of origin for an extended period of time but later returns to America? Well, at the time that you filled out the chart, what was the status of the student? The chart is a snapshot in time. You sit down, and as you're sitting it out, what is that student's status? Maybe 6 months from now, you're doing a new chart, and that student's status has changed. What is the graduate or student status at the time, at the date that you fill out the chart is the best way that I can answer that. Let's see. What if a graduate is self-employed but not provide documentation yet has this listed on social media sites such as LinkedIn? LinkedIn or Facebook alone does not meet the definition of a verifiable record of initial employment. It's a good supplement, but that documentation alone would be insufficient. What can you provide us? What information, business license, web page, business card? How can you show and demonstrate that that student is actually working in the field on a self-employed basis? We've had a couple of students that are graduating, after graduating, are working for another company and not related, but are making more money. Yeah, that's a tough one. You know, I think that's a challenge that schools face. I went to school to be a welder, and I learned that I could do website programming and got a job making twice as much money. Am I counting against the school? And the answer is yes. They're not working as a welder. So unfortunately, in this economy, sometimes that things happens with respect to student performance. What about a person who is taking care of a terminally ill parent or child? I think data, they are unemployed. But you can provide documentation to show the commission why. And again, that's one individual student. And this chart is not going to provide a mechanism to capture every single thing that happens to individual students. So they may just be a drop, or they might just be unemployed based upon the existing definitions. The challenge is for you to tell the story behind that in terms of the documentation that you have. Continuing ed verification, do you have a letter from the registrar or an acceptance letter or something that shows that student is pursuing on at least a half-time basis continuing education at an accredited institution? Is there any issue with the school hiring the graduate? Well, no, there's no issue, but is it related to the training that was provided? That's the question, right? What am I doing for the school that was specifically related to the training that I received? They may be employed in an unrelated occupation, but gainfully employed at the institution doing something else. So maybe that is a win. Lauren, you asked about these OPT international students. I don't know what that means, so maybe you and I can talk offline about that. What if a student is traveling with their active duty military spouse? They're unemployed, or they didn't graduate. And again, you can keep a record of showing why, but from a pure data perspective, I think the institution has to take the hit. And then the hope is that this is not the majority of students enrolled at your institution. What is the definition of sustainable employment? That's a good question. So we don't have a hard deadline. It's not 30 days. It's not 45 days. It's sustainable and ongoing. There's a great amount of diversity out there in terms of freelancing and full-time and part-time. But it simply can't be a single day of employment or a weekend job fair. It has to be ongoing and sustainable. And so if the verification process verifies that they hired the individual but then fired them 3 days later, and that's the majority of your graduates, it's going to raise some interesting questions about student performance and why are all your students unable to maintain their employment. So there's some flexibility there with respect to sustainability. It really means ongoing in nature for the student because of what their educational objectives are. I went to school to be a massage therapist to work no more than 2 hours a week, and I'm happy, and I got a job, and I'm a massage therapist, and I work 2 hours a week, and it's ongoing, and it's every week, but it's not more than 2 hours a week, and that's success for me as a graduate, and I will sign off on that. Gina, take a look at the guidelines for employment classification for career advancement. Can you expand upon related employment and how to determine it's related? Well, you're required to disclose, Ronell, in your catalog what the program objectives are, right? And so I'm going to school to become a welder. And if I'm working in a field where it's not clear that I'm welding, my title's not welder, it doesn't say anything about TIG, MIG, or any other kind of welding certifications, and I'm working as a front desk assistant, that might be unrelated. But I might be a front desk assistant at a welding company where I'm also doing welding. So you really need to be the devil in the details about the record. So that, Ronell, will give me a good transition into one last piece I want to talk about before I field some kind of final questions, as we are a little bit over time here. So let me pop off. I'll be right back, and we'll wrap things up. But I did want to share with you that a verifiable record will have the graduate name and contact information. It will have the date of initial employment. It will have the place of employment. It will have the employer address and phone number and a supervisor. And it will also have, and this is key, a descriptive job title and descriptive responsibilities. It must be clear to the commission that it is job training related, right? So we had an automotive example. We had a welding example. You know, you could talk about HVAC as well. If the job title is HVAC technician, pretty clear, right? If the job title is technician and the descriptive job responsibilities are, you know, do heating, ventilation, air conditioning repair, coolant, coils, and everything else, squirrel cages, and everything else that go along with HVAC repair, then that's pretty clear. And so, you know, I would organize your supporting documentation by program, by start dates, you know, organizing your graduate transcripts by program, by start date. You know, I had 10 students in that April 2014 start. You should organize those records by start date. And when we talk about the record, in my example, there's John Q. student. He was in the welding program. He started on April 1st. He graduated December 31. He is a welder that works for Rooney Welding that is owned by Mel Blunt. And there's his contact information. And he does tack, arc, TIG, and MIG welding. He does pipe fitting. He does maintenance welding. He does fabrication. It's pretty clear, based on this record, that was verified by the school, that shows how many hours a week and the date of hire, that has the graduate contact information, that they're working as a welder. And I think this is a pretty clear and clean record, and that's what you're striving for. Some of the challenges are, I went to the welding program, my job title is assistant. My start date and my grad date is missing my start date. There's no point of contact on the employer contact information. The description is he works in the shop. So Jane P. student who graduated from the welding program is an assistant who works in the shop. That does not describe or provide a mechanism for the commission to determine that that is job training related, as opposed to my other example where I graduated from the welding program, my title is a welder, and my descriptions are pipe fitting, maintenance welding, and fabrication. You know, a descriptive job title and job responsibilities. There's no phone number here. This says they were an intern and says that they started before they graduated. So, you know, there's a challenge there. And these are very common things that, that we find. The two big things that the independent third parties have shared with us is, one, sloppy record keeping is the #1 reason why a record is found to be incorrect. It's just sloppy and a lot of cutting and pasting without an appropriate QC. And two, the school waited too long to do the verification. They waited 6 months to start the verification process, and they didn't have very good results. And those are two things to keep in mind. But go through that independent verification webinar, and you'll learn a whole bunch of best practices that will set you up for success there. Okay, so that is, in a nutshell, everything that I wanted to cover with respect to the graduation employment chart. I'll jump back on here. I think we have a couple of last-minute questions I'll try to answer, but know this. The ACCSE staff are here to help answer any specific questions that you have. We'll do our very best to give you the explicit guidance that you need. There are 4 handouts in this system: the employment verification FAQ, the guidelines, the G&E chart, and the standards. Take a look at those. We're going to have this presentation and this webinar that will be deathly silent for the first 4 or 5 minutes and then pick up some momentum. That'll be online for you as a resource as well. And then, ask the question. Get the guidance that you need to be successful, and we'll make sure that we'll do what we can to answer your questions. All right, so let me jump in here real quick to see what kind of last-minute questions we might have here. And again, just quickly, I really want to thank you for your patience with us, and hopefully you're finding some value in today's webinar. And I know that I didn't answer everyone's questions. There are a lot, but doing our very best to get you the guidance that you need. So yes, we will provide you with the PowerPoint and the webinar recording as a follow-up. Some additional questions. When verifying, do we always need to verify pay? What if the company does not want to verify pay? Well, they should verify that they're making money if they don't want to disclose how much money it is. But I would try to do everything I could to get as much information as possible to make sure that it's related, it's sustainable, and it's making money. With a verbal confirmation of employment, do we need a signature from the graduate or employee? No, you would need to have a verbal from both the graduate and a verbal from the employer as well. So you could have a written signed by the graduate, you could have a written signed by the employer, or you can have a verbal from both. And then you would fill out your verification form to indicate that as such. So hopefully, Jacob, that answers your question. Career advancement definition, is it before they enroll as you stated, or if they get a job in their senior year or while enrolled? Is that still career advancement? No, I mean, if they get a job before they graduate, that's not career advancement. They got a job based on the training they received. The question that may come up, Cyrus, is why are all these students getting jobs before they graduate? Why don't they need the certificate to get the job? If it's a lot of students doing that, if it's just 1 or 2 students, they're employed in the field, and if they dropped out, you can see that there's that second part of the G&E chart which gives you a chance to capture them. But if they were employed before they started, and we see this with fields like EMT, I'm an EMT, and I went to school as an EMT in an EMT program. The reason was I was eligible for a promotion or just to keep my job. That's the career advancement that we're talking about. If someone works for an employment agency and works at multiple assignments, is that considered sustainable? Yeah, it could be. I look to the side because it really depends. Is it ongoing? Is it truly sustainable, or is it just 1 week of work?
So this is Michael. I've come back in just as I've been listening as Chris has been going through this, and kind of the theme that I've picked up on is what I tried to allude to earlier on, and that is that the graduation and employment chart is not intended to try and provide a specific category for every kind of instance that may come up. So it is looking to use the categorizations that are there for the best opportunity. Also, really, I can only encourage you to go and read the guidelines for employment classification, because as Chris is trying to explain things here, there's better nuance and better description and definition. Like, for example, the verbal verification is not a normal part of the process. It's only after you have had significant efforts to try and get written documentation can you rely upon verbal. So there are nuances there that are laid out in the guidelines for employment and classification that I really think it's important that you read through. And I think that they're pretty clear and pretty self-explanatory. And so, use that document as a guide. It should answer a lot of the questions that you have. The last thing that I'll add is, you know, when students come to the school, they either have been told or they have a particular idea about what employment in that field means. And so where we run into some difficulty is when there is a significant number of graduates that end up in fields that are only mildly related. You know, they're in the general healthcare field, even though the program was very highly specific to respiratory therapy or surgical technology or something along those lines. ACCSC does not typically consider those to be related or in field, and so we look very much to the employment objectives that are laid out in the students. So as you're looking to classify students as to whether or not they're employed, I think that's a primary question that an institution must ask itself in every institution. Are these the objectives that we set out to as the institution to meet, and do these meet the objectives of the student and their employment? And that's where a lot of these questions about, well, does temporary employment work? It could if that meets the objectives of the student. It just has to be sustainable temporary employment. That is to say that maybe an individual doesn't want to work at the same company all the time and enjoys the freedom that temporary employment allows for. But it can't be a one-time, one-off, one-only kind of thing. That's not sustainable. So again, while ACCSC has not defined specific kinds of time frames, the idea and the intent around it is that when an individual seeks employment and an employer offers employment, there is an idea that this is something that can be sustained. So anyway, those are just some parting thoughts about a lot of the questions that come through, and it'll be important again for folks to begin to, as they continue to try to learn about these classifications, to use those guidelines that are in our standards. They will provide some additional guidance, and then beyond that, the categories that are provided within the chart itself, I think Chris is very clear about explaining. All of those things put together hopefully should give you the tools that you need to successfully complete this information.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I really appreciate that. And again, I know that for some first-timers, this is probably pretty overwhelming, but we're here to help walk you through it. You know, there's a couple of last few questions I'll take on real quick before we wrap things up. And again, for the 600 folks that are still with us, I really appreciate your attention and your time. One of the questions is, am I supposed to document initial employment or all of the jobs that my graduates get after they leave my school? And the answer is initial employment. So they go to school, they graduate, they get that first job in the field. That's what we're interested in tracking. If they leave a year later, they leave a year later. But if we find that a majority of students are leaving after 3 and 4 days, it'll raise different questions. But keep in mind that this is about tracking initial employment. If a student lives in another state, it doesn't impact your responsibility to provide placement services for them. That's not an international student, but you know, so that would not be a waiver of placement. You would need to continue to track whether they're in your state or in another state here in the United States as well. We don't have a preference with respect to the type of written verification form, whether it's a fax or an email. It's got to be clear, it's got to be legible, it's got to have job titles and responsibilities, it's got to check all those boxes that you'll find in the guidelines for employment classification. So I think that there's some other, well, John caught my vintage Steeler references. Thank you, John. I'm glad you were paying attention to that. I think that, you know, there's some other kind of nuanced questions here that I'm going to try and engage with folks offline at. We've been at it almost 2 hours here, so I think everybody's pretty bleary-eyed. So let's go ahead and wrap things up. But on behalf of Mike and the rest of the staff here at ACCSC, I really appreciate you joining us. We hope this was useful. We hope it laid a solid foundation. Maybe it triggered some ideas. It probably triggered some questions. So let's take the time to engage on those and walk through them. I will provide a copy of the slides and a copy of the webinar recording as resources for you. And in the coming days, there will be a new publication that focuses on student achievement. We call it a Blueprint for Success, and we'll have that available to you as a resource as well. So we're really trying to emphasize the importance of successful student achievement. This is really everything that we do, and everything that you do every single day is focused on students, and this gives us an opportunity to demonstrate the important work and the impact that you all are having on workforce development in this country. So thank you so much for your patience and understanding with some of the technology and the glitches. We really appreciate it, and I really look forward to talking with many of you as we go forward. So thanks again for being here, and we'll talk soon. Okay, bye-bye.